90s and early 2000s, I worked doing trauma scene work. I was a supervisor of a crew that you never see or hear about, but what we did was go into homes, buildings, or structures after a homicide, suicide, or accidental death, and situations like that. Sometimes they were very gruesome, and sometimes it was as simple as removing a chair and cutting out a piece of carpet. Oftentimes, it involved a lot of cleaning and removal to sanitize the scene both visually and biologically. Our goal was to leave the scene as void as possible. Like if you didn't know what had just happened there, you would just assume that the place was under renovation. This one time, it was about midday, so not the usual middle of the night come clean up after a dead body call. I don't know why the police and fire departments always waited till night to call us out, but I would say 80% of the time, that's how it happened. The day was bright, sunny, but not so warm, in a suburb of Los Angeles. I won't give the exact details of the location for privacy, or that I even remember exactly which street it was on, but I do know it was an older yet very wealthy area of Los Angeles. The kind of neighborhood where you expect doctors, business executives, or people in the entertainment industry to live in. As we pulled up to the home, it was a huge spread of the mid-century modern with fancy landscaping and a long curved driveway. The place looked very well kept and probably a showcase of the neighborhood back in the 1950s and 60s. The typical scenario was I, being the supervisor, would approach the door while my crew waited by the trucks. Since this was supposed to be a small job, we only had my vehicle and our service truck. I remember seeing an old fancy Mercedes and what looked like an old Porsche in the driveway. No other cars, but maybe there were some cars in the garage that I didn't see. As I walked up to the door, an older woman answered my knock. She was probably in her mid-50s, very well made up with lots of jewelry on, and she was wearing something that reminded me of Miss Roper from Three's Company. Not the cheap looking, just not in the 90s style. I explained we were here for the cleanup work. I then noticed she had a drink in her hand, like a martini or something. Like I said, this was the middle of the day, and probably before lunch. Not unusual to find people drinking in a time like this. She leads me into the house. It's surprisingly dark and hazy, with cigarette smoke inside. Now, what happened next was really odd. The entire place looked like it was a time capsule from the now what we would call the Madman era. The house wasn't what gave me the creeps, but as she is leading me to like a second den area, we pass through the front room, which is another living room and a bar/pool table area. Like I said, this house was huge, but there were a ton of people in the house, and to describe them, well, they looked like characters from some early 1960s movie. A guy with a sports coat, glasses, and boat captain's hat, a guy in a tuxedo, a lady wearing a fur collar long evening dress, and other people there that looked like some weird collage of a mixed people from some dinner party set back in some Rosemary Baby movie set. The amount of people all throughout the house didn't add up. There were only 2 small cars in the driveway, and one could only fit 2 people. Where did all these fancy people come from? There was a low mumble of different conversations from all around, with an occasional glance at me. As we were walking over to the scene, I remember one of those huge old cabinets with a record player playing Johnny Matthews. I know that because it's not for me to say, playing on the record was like I was about to walk into the Twilight Zone. We finally get to the room where the suicide happened. There was a red velvet chair that the deceased was in, and it wasn't a gunshot, but I assumed it was a razor to the wrist. The lady is standing at the entry to the room as I'm looking over the scene. I tell her we will remove the carpet and dispose of the chair, as it held most of the blood. She just nodded and still had her drink in her hand. I asked her if she could sign our work order and the release for disposal of personal property, meaning the chair. As she sighs, she says, "When you and your crew are finished, just see yourselves out." I told her it probably wouldn't take us more than an hour. She turned and just walked away and back to her party. I make the journey back to the front door, through the record playing, through the cigarette smoke, and through the low-toned party conversations. I make it back to the truck, and tell them that this one is creepy. There's a freaking party going on inside, and everyone is dressed up. I lead my crew back to the room, and they start bagging up the chair and cutting out the old blue carpet. The black stains were where the blood dripped down through it, and we ended up just cutting out half of the room, and even a straight cut across the room, as to avoid having to move a lot of big old furniture. We never found out who committed suicide, but I just assumed it was the lady's husband. As we were finishing up, I stayed behind in the room to take final photos, as it was our protocol to take before and after pictures. I thought about looking for the lady of the house, just to let her know we were finished. Even though I got the impression we were to do what we needed to do, then leave and not bother her again, I still wanted to give her confirmation. So as I slowly walked through the party areas again, I noticed no one was making eye contact with me or even acknowledged my presence. You would think that if everyone at the party had known about the death, it would have been a conversation or at least interest. I walked over to the front door and turned to look back at the party, stuck in a time capsule, and closed the massive front door behind me. Driving away, I couldn't help but think what a strange day, so bright and sunny outside. I wonder how many people knew we just cleaned up the remnants of someone's last moments on earth. My parents went to a party at their friend's house and said that they would be back late, so I wouldn't have to wait for them. I remember being excited and thinking that it meant I get to stay on my PC all night long. Just casual 14-year-old boy thing. It was almost 2 a.m. and I remember feeling sleepy, so I went to sleep. Now here's where the creepy part begins. I heard the door keys opening the main door, so I was thinking, thank God I already decided to shut down my PC. Otherwise my parents would have killed me for playing all night long. I heard heavy footsteps walking in, so I knew it was my dad. So I walked out my room to say hello and ask my parents how the party was. Expecting to see my drunk dad and mom, I opened my door and I only saw my dad. I asked, "So, where's mom?" He didn't look at me and said, "Oh, we'll be back soon. Don't worry. I just got back because I forgot something." The first creepy thing was that it's a pretty long drive from their friend's house. So why the hell would he drive all the way back from there just because he forgot something? And the second strange thing was that he was completely sober, like he didn't even have a beer or any kind of alcohol. I remember thinking that this was weird. So my dad left the house and left me wondering what just happened. I was going to sleep again, and like literally 15 minutes later, I'm getting a call from my dad, and he said with a completely drunk voice and with loud music in the background, "Hello? Where are you, Tommy? I can't find you since you left to smoke a cigarette." I said, "It's me, Alex. You're calling the wrong person." "Oh, sorry for waking you up, buddy," and he hung up. I didn't sleep an ounce of sleep that night. I have no idea how he made that 30-40 minute drive in 10 to 15 minutes and got completely drunk. I do not know to this day what that was, because my dad claimed that he does not remember driving back to our house and forgetting something. He said he never left the party. Thinking back, the story gives me nightmares and chills. I just pray that whoever I met that night never comes back. Since it was long ago, it felt like a dream, and I was sure it was. I was at a relative's house for a family party. I remember the drive was pretty long. I slept in the car for most of the trip. We rarely ever had to drive this far, but maybe as a kid it feels longer than it really is. The party was nice for whatever the occasion was. We sat outside at some round tables listening to music, and when it got dark, these lights turned on. They were all over the backyard, lighting it up perfectly. My parents were on the dance floor, or the made-up one, and I sat with my cousin. I was getting tired, but I didn't want to miss out on anything. I sat and watched everyone having fun. I glanced over at my cousin, who moved his head to the right quietly, saying, "Let's go." I was never one to question my slightly older cousin. I shrugged and stood up and followed him. He walked over to this girl around our age. I didn't notice her before. So many questions ran through my mind, like, who is this and where did she come from? My cousin seemed interested in her. I was more confused. As we walked closer to her, I noticed her outfit. It was way too cold to be wearing a dress. She said she was the neighbor and pointed to the huge house next door. It was a Victorian-style house. She took us on a path down the hill. There weren't any fences, and on the other side of the path was a forest. As we walked towards her house, she pointed to the window where her room was. The house looked old and run down, but it seemed rude to comment on that. I kept turning around to make sure I could still see my family outside. After a while of feeling uncomfortable with this girl, I decided to go back. My stomach felt uneasy, and I was growing more and more anxious the closer we got to the house. I made a few comments to my cousin, and he brushed them off, until finally telling me to just go. I rolled my eyes and turned back around to the party again. When I turned back to tell him to come with me, they were gone, and I was alone in this dirt trail, and nobody was outside anymore. I ran as fast as I could back and rushed into the house. Everyone looked at me like they just saw a ghost. The silence was finally broken when my dad said something. "Where you been? We've been looking for you for 5 hours. Where were you?" I was confused. I went to the girl's house and came back. That couldn't have taken me 5 hours. The worst part about this is that when I asked my cousin about that girl, he tells me he doesn't remember, and the house has been vacant since they moved in.